On episode 649 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we discuss how to design your perfect strength training program after 40. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/649. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. Each week, we dive deep into health and fitness topics that affect those of us over 40. I'm Coach Allen. I'm an NASM certified personal trainer with specializations in corrective exercise, behavior change, performance enhancement, and fitness nutrition. A Precision Nutrition Level 1 coach, a FAI certified functional age-linked specialist, and an OTA Level 2 online trainer. Each week, I'm joined by our co-host, Coach Rachel. She is an NASM certified personal trainer and a RRCA Level 1 run coach. Let us be your coaches as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hey, Raz, how are you?
Good, Alan. How are you today?
Well, good.
Yeah.
Okay, this is our second pass at this because, I'm on family reunion and we were all out at the pool and things were okay with kids running around splashing, but I don't know what happened, but there was a fight and then there was screaming and wailing. Well, you heard it, Rachel. You were here. So we started recording this, but I don't know. I may just use our original hello, but probably not. But we'll do this again. So yeah, I'm in Orlando. I flew to the States. I saw my mom, and now I'm here with my dad's family. And there's a lot of us here, and a lot of kids. And,
awesome.
Kids around the pool, kids screaming, kids wailing, a fight. And
geez.
So yeah, here we are. I've moved up to the game room area, which is surprisingly quiet at the moment, but we'll see. So how are things up there?
Good. Just getting ready for my daughter's wedding, forgetting my own anniversary. It's just kind of chaos up here as well.
All right. So are you ready to talk about how to design your perfect strength training program after 40?
Sure.
All right. So before we get started in actually talking about how to write a program, I think there's a lot of core fundamental issues and things we need to talk about before we get into that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through each of these because you need to consider each of these as you're thinking about how you're going to design your program. So the first one I want to talk about is stretching. You absolutely need to warm up a muscle. We're over 40 and we're not as resilient. Our muscles aren't as pliable as they were when we were younger. So we absolutely need to make sure that the muscles are warmed up before we do the work. Now, this does not necessarily mean static stretching the way we used to do it. When you do static stretching, you are lengthening that muscle and thereby inhibiting the muscle. And when you do that, you lose strength. The capacity to use strength goes down. So for strength training, I do not encourage static stretching before you do the work. Only the muscles that you are going to work. So an example would be, I almost never just work my calves. And so my calves are not used in most of the movements and things that I do. So if I want to build strength and do some strength workout, I know that my calves, which are typically very, very tight, are going to keep me from moving in an appropriate form. So my form is going to suffer if I just go try to do the movement and I don't stretch my calves. So I do use some static stretching on my calves because I know they're tight and I know they're going to harm my form. But for the rest of my body, it's all about dynamic stretching, which means moving around, bouncing around. If you've watched a sporting event, you may notice before the game starts, people are bouncing around like frogs and sprinting and, moving side to side and doing all this stuff. What they're doing is dynamically stretching. They're taking the muscles in their body and they're moving them through the full range of motion, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they're warming up those muscles. And that's not called dynamic stretching. So you do need to do some dynamic stretching before you do your workout. And this is extremely important, especially if you're working out in the morning. So if you roll out of bed and you're going to go do your strength training first thing, you need to put some warm up in the front end of that. So do some dynamic stretching, moving around. And this is a little bit more than just getting on a treadmill and walking for 5 minutes. You need to be moving all the muscles that you're going to work through their full range of motion So if you're going to be doing back and chest and shoulders, I mean, you need to move those through the full range of motion, arm circles, swings, all kinds of things to get those muscles moving. With your legs, you're bouncing, you're moving side to side. You're doing some body weight squats, duck walks, things like that. Get the blood flowing through your whole body, warming yourself up. That's dynamic stretching. And you must do that before you do any training, particularly if you're going to work out in the morning. Then after you're done, if you feel particularly tight in a set of muscles that you just worked, you can do some static stretching after. And the static stretching is good because that's going to help with your recovery. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is concepts of compound movements and isolation movements. Now, compound movements are important for us when we're beginners, particularly when we're beginners, but it's important for everybody. They're the kind of movements that you actually want to do. A compound movement is when you're moving more than one joint at a time. Okay. So this could be like the body weight squat or any kind of squat. When you do a squat, your ankles are moving, your knees are moving, and your hips are moving. Now, you probably notice the hips and the knees more than the ankles, but your ankles, knees, and hips are moving in that movement. That's a compound movement. It's a critical compound movement. It's one you should be doing regularly. An isolation movement is when only one joint is being used. So an example would be the bicep curl or the tricep extension. Now, as a beginner, you should focus all of your attention on compound movements. There's very little reason for you to do an isolation movement unless there's some form of injury that you need to work around. But for the most part, you should just be looking at compound movements to build your programs. As you get further along, you can start introducing isolation movements. But initially, there's not much use for isolation movement. They're easy, they're fun. Everybody likes to build bigger, stronger arms, but that's not strength. That's muscle and that's physique, and it's a different thing. So for strength training, try to stick to compound movements, which means more than one joint is moving. Okay. The next concept is concentric and eccentric movement. Okay. So to make this easy, I'll focus on an isolation movement. I just told you not to do, but okay. So concentric is when the muscle gets shorter. It's when you're doing work. That muscle is doing work by getting shorter. Okay. Eccentric is when it's lengthening. So it's letting the weight down. So the reason I want to use the bicep curl is because it's an easy way to illustrate this. If you have the dumbbell down by your side and you're full extended, as you try to bring the dumbbell up, your bicep is shortening. That's the concentric. It's moving against gravity. So it's providing force against that weight to lift it up. Okay. Once you get it to the top and you start to lower it, now you're doing the eccentric portion of that movement. Okay. You're lengthening the bicep. You're fighting against gravity, but you're letting gravity have it. Okay. So that's concentric and eccentric. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is range of motion. So range of motion is when you move your body through the full range of its movement there. So the bicep curl, again, another easy example, when your arm's completely straight and you're bringing the dumbbell up, when you get it to the top, you're going to run out of space because the biceps there, the forearm's there, and you're going to just get to the top. And now that's as far as it goes. And then you lower it back down to full extension. That's full range of motion. There's very little reason to not do full range of motion, especially as a beginner. Now, when we talk about range of motion, we have to talk about two other topics, and that's flexibility and mobility. And people a lot of times will get these two terms mixed up. Okay. Flexibility is your ability to move all the way through the full range of motion. So when I was younger and trying to be a bodybuilder, I didn't pay a lot of attention to this. I did a lot of partial reps. And as a result, I built up some issues with my tendons near my elbows, okay, on the inside of my elbows. I don't even know what you call that area, but where the bicep has a tendon that hits the bottom part of the arm, the forearm, to make that movement happen. I did a lot of partial reps, a lot of squeezes, and as a result, I cannot fully extend my arms. There's just a slight, little bend, even when I'm fully extended, even when I'm holding weight, there's a slight bend to my arm. So my flexibility is quite limited in my elbows. Okay. So flexibility is the ability to move. And some people are hyper flexible, meaning they can move well beyond what would normally be considered the end point for a movement. So you can hyperextend your elbows and it's not a straight line anymore. That's not great either.
No.
but it happens, and it can be genetic. And so you don't have to worry about it. But mobility is the ability to move through that range of motion with control. So if you are hypermobile or under mobile, under flexible. You just want to have control through the full range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing your work, you always want to work through the full range of motion. Now, one area where this is particularly important is the squat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people tell me I can't do squats because my knees, I can't run because my knees. And I'll say, no, you can't do these because you don't do them right.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us are squatting every single day. Almost everybody is. I mean, I poop at least once a day. So I know I squat to sit on the toilet. Women, you're on that toilet more than once. I know you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you're squatting. That's a squat.
Mm-hmm.
You sit down in a chair. That's a squat. So we are squatting every day. We're just not always doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we're not doing it through the full range of motion. Now, if we took it from its base point, full range of motion would be from a standing position until our bottoms are at our ankles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's often termed in the CrossFit vernacular is ass to grass.
Yes.
Okay, you don't have to go that full range of motion because there's a lot more involved to it as balance and everything else. From a strength perspective, you don't have to go that far. But if you want to, you can. But what you do have to do is you have to make sure your hip crease, which is where your thigh meets your pelvis, that has to go below your knees.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very important because if your pelvis crease, your hip crease does not go below your knees, then all the work is being done by your quadriceps, which are the muscles
Mm-hmm.
on the front of your thigh. And so as you go down, just before you get to parallel, all of this movement, this eccentric portion of your squat
Mm-hmm.
is being controlled by the quadriceps. And if you stop before you hit parallel,
Mm-hmm.
you're using those quadriceps to stop yourself and all of the weight you are carrying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's putting stress on the knee. And then you're using your quadriceps to reinitiate the movement up, to start the concentric portion of that lift.
Mm-hmm.
And that also puts a lot of pressure on your knee. So take your hip crease slightly below your knees. And now you have to fire your glutes, your butt muscles. They're the strongest muscle in your body besides your heart. And so they're going to easily be able to slow you down, stop you, and then help you go back up. And it'll switch back over to the quadricep. But by the time it's doing that, it's not putting as much stress on your knees. And then all you have to really focus on is that your knees are tracking out over your toes.
Mm-hmm.
So your knees are aligned with your toes and you're in good squat form. And you should easily be able to squat.
Perfect.
And get stronger that way. So that's why range of motion is very important. And that's why form is very important. And you'll hear me say that over and over and over. All of this stuff that I'm trying to teach you here is going to be about good form and making sure you don't hurt yourself. Okay. The next area we need to get into is volume. Volume can be affected by basically three different things. The first one is repetitions. You'll sometimes hear it called reps. Okay. But it's repetitions of an exercise. So if we're talking about the squat, you're fully standing up. Maybe you got the dumbbells, or you got a bar on your shoulders. You go down to the bottom position, you come back up. That's one rep. Okay. Usually when I'm working with someone that's relatively new, I'll do 10 reps. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute, why I like to go with 10 to 12 reps at the beginning. So we're doing these repetitions, but doing just one set or one group of repetitions. So I just do 10, that's often not enough volume. So what comes up next is sets. So what we'll do is we'll do like 3 sets of 10, which means we'll do 10 repetitions. We'll take a short break. We'll do another 10 repetitions, take another short break, do another rest, and then we'll come back and do 10. So basically 3 sets of 10. And that's a pretty common workout scheme that I use for most of my clients. And so you can add repetitions, you can add sets. So maybe when someone first starts out, I might say, just do two sets of 10. And when they get comfortable with it, we add the third set. Okay, that's volume. And then the final way is called tempo, or time under tension. We talked about time under tension a couple weeks back with Brad. And so time under tension is where you just slow down. And there's various variations of how you can do this. But usually when we do a rep, we just go down for a count of 1 and up for a count of 1. That's fairly common. That's what we think it is, just do down 1, up 1, down 1, up 1. Well, if you slow it down, any portion of that, you're going to make it a little harder. You're going to add a little bit of volume of work to this. So great reason that you might do this just naturally is, let's say you're doing your repetition, you do 3 sets of 10 with 10 pounds. And all the gym has next is a 15 pounders, but those are too heavy for you. And so you're like, I don't know what to do to get to move forward, because the 3 sets of 10 are not hard now.
Mhm.
but the 15s are just too much. I mean, it's 10%. I mean, it's 50% increase in weight. So it's a huge jump to go from
Mhm.
10. I call that law of small numbers in weight training.
Mhm.
When you're using smaller dumbbells, 3 to 5 is a big jump.
Mhm.
5 to 8, 5 to 10, is a
Big jump.
100% jump. And
Mhm.
so when you're using smaller dumbbells, it's only 3 more pounds or only 5 more pounds, but that can be a significant move relative to where you
Mhm.
are. So sometimes time under tension is the way that you can fix that. So what I would do is say, okay, I'm doing 1 1s. I can do 3 sets of 10, but I can't do the 15s. So what I'm going to do is get a metronome or a stopwatch to go 1 2 1 2 1 2, as a repeating count. And I'm going to go down for 2 and up for 2. Promise you, that's going to be a lot of volume. You're going to feel that for sure. It may be
Mhm.
down for 2 and up for 1 at
Mhm.
first. And so you're adding a little bit of time under tension for each of those reps throughout the sets. And that's going to help you get stronger.
Mhm.
And then eventually,
Awesome.
yes, you will be able to start doing reps and sets with the 15s. Okay, the next one is rest. You heard me talking about doing a rep, doing a set,
Mhm.
and then taking a rest. A lot of new people training don't want to take that rest. They're like, well, I could just
Right.
go do the next one, right? Then I'm going to do more work. It's going to be harder. I'm like,
Mhm.
well, the problem with that is what happens when you take this rest. Okay, so when you're using your muscle, the way that's happening is inside the muscle is the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the energy base for that muscle. So for a muscle to contract, to get shorter, to do the work, it
Mhm.
needs to fire off that energy to tell that muscle fiber to contract. Okay. And it does that with a chemical called ATP. And the TP is triple phosphate. So there's 3 phosphates on this thing. And when it needs energy, it cleaves one of those phosphates off and becomes ADP.
Mhm.
Now, if we take a rest for at least 30 seconds, but usually about a minute, that's what I usually use, it's able to rebuild some of those ATPs, able to, through the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, wherever you want to learn it from.
Mhm.
It basically is able to add that phosphate back in, and then it has more energy. So you can imagine it's like if you had something plugged in and you needed just a little bit more juice
Mhm.
for that to do what it does, then you plug it in for just a second, and then it has that extra juice. So
Mhm.
I usually have people rest for about 60 seconds. But if you're using smaller muscles like your shoulders, even if you're a bodybuilder, your muscles are still the smallest muscles that you work out. So maybe 45 seconds. For some of my legs, heavy stuff, deadlifts, things like that, I might rest for as much as 2 minutes. And so you just kind of play with this and see 45 seconds, a minute, 90
Mhm.
seconds, you can kind of find your spot where you're able to optimize your strength throughout the set. If you don't do that, what you're probably going to notice is at any given weight, you do your first 10 and they're totally cool. And then if you jump right back in and try to do another set, now you can barely get 6.
Mhm.
Whereas if you took your minute off, you're going to get another 10. So
For
again,
sure.
more work because you let yourself rest and recover. You have more energy to fire the muscle fibers to do the work. And so you want to make sure you're taking that rest, but you don't want to take like 5 minutes off or 10 minutes off because now you're letting the muscle cool down. And if the muscle cools down, then you're going to have to warm up again. So go back to
Mhm.
that dynamic stretching and waste another bit of time doing that to warm yourself back up. And you don't want to do that. So
No.
you want to have just long enough rest where you're going to be able to recover enough to do the work, but not so much that you cool down. So
Perfect.
that form of rest is really important, as is the rest between workouts. Now, some people like to, when it's like, I'm just going to do this every single day. And I know if you're trying to learn a new language or you want to run, then that's probably a good time to do a lot of work every day so that you can retain that stuff or that you build the endurance to be able to do your runs. However, that's
Mhm.
not how muscle growth works. So
Mhm.
when those muscle fibers are firing, what's happening is they're damaging themselves. And so they need time to recover. If you're working hard enough, there's going to be enough damage and you just need time to let that fix itself. When the body
Mhm.
rebuilds those muscle fibers, they're going to rebuild them stronger. But you've got to give it the protein and the time to make that happen. And so I usually recommend 72 hours as a base for people over 40. If you do work certain muscle groups, you want to take about 72 hours off. If you're
Mhm.
doing something a little bit more intense, so when I'm doing heavy squats or heavy
Mhm.
deadlifts or any kind of heavy leg days, I'll take a whole week off.
Nice.
And that's just because that's what my legs need to fully recover and have another killer workout after that week's over. But if I'm just doing something basic, then I'll just do the 72. And so what's cool about the 72 hours is that you can do the work one day, take 2 days off, and do another set of work, take 2 days off and another set. And over the course of 2 weeks, you've done 5 days, 5 workouts. And that's about 2.5 a week, which is plenty for you to build strength and do what you need to do. And then you have those other 2 days every other 2 days. And so when you start looking at that, now you can start looking at other fitness modalities that are important to you, like endurance, mobility, balance, and you can put some time into those modalities. Or it can just be about recovery. So you can be doing some light yoga, some stretching, some meditation, just other things that are going to improve the quality of your health and the quality of your fitness. And so you have time. You don't have to put in an hour a day every day of the week. And particularly for strength training, because you can easily get by with 2.5, a week, and instead of 5, or 7. So those other days can be used for valuable things like building other fitness modalities.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay. Now, the next thing I want to get into is neuromuscular communication. And all this is when we're trying to move our body and we're not familiar with a particular movement, or we're not familiar with a particular volume, be it weight sets or tempo, the brain has a hard time talking to some of these muscles, fibers. So if I know, okay, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to grab a bottle of water, my brain knows about how much that bottle of water weighs, and it knows about how many muscle fibers around each joint it needs to apply to pick it up and drink from it. So that's why we don't, you see robots, they just go to reach for something, they crush it. And that's why we don't crush a water bottle when we pick it up. Our brain knows about how many muscle fibers to fire and how much to fire them to get our hand in the position we can pick that water up, and for the bicep and everything else and shoulders to get it up to our mouth. Okay. When you start doing weights, your brain's not used to doing that. So it doesn't know how many muscle fibers it's going to need to fire to do that particular movement. So when you first start, your brain's not going to fire enough muscle fibers for you to do heavy stuff. So we always start out light, and we're teaching our brain the right muscle fibers to fire. That's the first big communication thing. Which ones do I need to fire? And then how many? And so as the brain starts to communicate with the muscle, it picks up that information and it creates the wiring in our brain to say, okay, this is how you do a bench press. These are the muscle fibers I have to fire. And based on your last workout, it says, okay, I'm going to need to fire more muscle fibers if I want to get this weight up. And it starts trying to fire those other muscle fibers, stores the information, says, okay, next time, instead of this many muscle fibers, I'm going to fire more. And so that first bit of strength gain that you're going to see as a beginner feels good. And it's good because you're teaching your brain how to lift weights. Okay. Once the brain figures out how to lift the weights, then things are going to get to the point where now it's muscles. Before it was the brain talking to the muscle and saying, okay, fire more, fire more, fire more. Now the wiring's in there. It knows how to do the movement. Now it's say, okay, we fire all the muscle fibers we need to do this particular lift. As we get tired through the sets, it's going to fire a couple more and a couple more, but it's also going to have less ATP. And so you kind of see that's where that strength and then you're fighting that. And now you get to a point where at the end, you're firing almost all of your muscle fibers to make this happen. And that's where that strength curve. So you say, okay, I started and I was doing 20 pounds and now I'm doing 40 pounds and then I'm doing 60 pounds. Like, this is incredible. I'm going to be able to do 600 pounds in 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden it plateaus off. Well, it plateaus because now you're firing all the muscle fibers, and that's all those muscle fibers can do. And so now when you take those days off and you're getting adequate protein, we're building those muscle fibers stronger. In some cases, we're adding more muscle fibers. Okay. And so as you go through this, that neuromuscular communication becomes important. And so that's where a lot of people will change up their workouts from time to time to just teach their body how to fire more muscle fibers in different ways. That's good. Overall, you want to do that. But in a general sense, if you just notice you're getting stronger, 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 it starts to plateau, don't freak out. That just means you finished phase 1 of teaching your body how to lift weights. And now you're actually working on the muscles.
Awesome.
Okay. So that's when we talk about that strength curve and what's happening. That's most of the time what happens. And then if you change the workout, there's a little bit of neuromuscular learning that needs to happen. And then you start building muscle that way.
I love it. That's awesome.
Okay. The final one I want to talk about is failure. A lot of people think they need to work to failure. You know, if I don't drop this on my face, I didn't do enough.
That sounds dangerous.
It does. It is dangerous. Okay. Failure's okay. Failure's not a terrible thing. You know, if you've worked the muscle as hard as you can work it, and then your form starts to degrade. So you learn the form of the exercise, and then your form starts to degrade. At that point, you failed. Not when you drop the weight, but when your body can't do the movement. So you'll see these guys doing like bicep curls, and then all of a sudden you see their hips starting to swing and they're throwing the weight up and everything. Okay, they already failed. They don't need to do more reps. But the other side of it is failure isn't the goal, because you don't need failure to build muscle. You just have to put enough stimulus on the muscle where it's like, okay, we did some damage to this muscle, and I don't know why, but Rachel wants to lift more weight. She's got a reason that she wants to be able to do this. So we've got to get stronger for Rachel, because that's what she seems to need. And so that's what you do. So if you're working the workout, you're keeping good form, and then you start noticing that your form is degrading, you just stop. You've went far enough. It doesn't have to be to a point where you can't do even one more. If you can't do it with good form, you've already reached the point. Stop.
That's
only bad things can happen after that when you're over 40.
That's what I was going to
20s,
say.
you see these guys slinging the weights around.
Yeah.
They're getting a little additional benefit from those cheat sets, but not much. When you're over 40, you're much more likely to hurt yourself than to get any benefit from it. So
absolutely,
failure is when you cannot do one more rep with good form. Okay. Not when you can't do anything. Now, I guess I should talk about one more topic on here that I didn't have on my notes, but I'm thinking about right now. And this is delayed onset muscle soreness. Okay, DOMS. Okay. So when you do something that does make your muscle damaged, particularly when it's a new movement and the muscles are really not used to any of this stuff, that damage is going to cause some chemical reactions in your body that your body, I mean, you just did something to your body that it was like, what in the hell, Rachel, are you thinking? Okay. So those chemicals and all the stuff that's going on, that metabolics and all of it is going to hurt. It's going to cause pain. Now, the interesting thing is it's not pain that happens right then. So if you feel pain while you're doing a workout, like the burning's okay. But if you feel pain in a joint while you're doing work, stop. Don't do any resistance on that joint at all. Okay. Because it's possible that you strained it or worse. So if you feel pain, particularly in a joint while you're doing work, just stop. Okay. But if usually delayed onset soreness takes a couple of days, a day or two, or sometimes 3. And then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Okay. So the thing with DOMS is, this is metabolites in the muscle. This is some damage to the muscle, but the damage repairs in the 72 hours we talked about. But sometimes the metabolites have not cleared. So you may be still feeling some soreness in your muscles after the 72 hours. It's okay for you to work out again. Now, again, if the pain is in the muscles, I mean, in the joints, you need to let that rest. You can't go back. But if it's in the muscle, you'll know DOMS when you feel it. You'll know it. And you'll be like, okay. But it's important for you to do 2 things when you find that you have DOMS. One is to drink plenty of water. Because so water cleans. Okay, water cleans outside our body, and water cleans inside our body. So as water goes through there, we're keeping our basically all the fluids, all the things that help, in particular, our blood volume, big enough that it can clean the stuff out faster. And then we want to make sure we're moving the body part. Now, not with resistance, but let's say you did some squats, you did some other work, and your thighs are just on fire 2 days later. And you're like, oh my God. And you notice every time you sit down and stop moving, it doesn't hurt, but then you try to stand back up and you're like, oh my God, there it is again. And you're walking funny on all the stuff. It's important to keep walking. So if you have to sit down, because, most of us do with our jobs, then sit down, but try to get up and move a little bit more. If you can, push away from your desk and just straighten your leg out and let it go back down. But don't do it with resistance, but just move your body through a full range of motion. And that's going to help push some of those metabolites out faster. So drinking water and moving regularly are going to be the keys to making that go away faster.
Perfect. Yep.
You might not hurt when you're sitting still, but you will the next time you move. You may not hurt while you're asleep, but you will when you get up. So try to move around so you can flush those metabolites out faster. Drink plenty of water to make sure that you have the blood volume and other fluids to just make that happen naturally. So that's the two things when you do find yourself with DOMS to do to make sure you're getting through it fast. After the 72 hours, the muscle repair is complete. You can do the workout again. And in fact, I found for the most part, if I have DOMS, I wait the 72 hours and I go back and do the work. It goes away.
Awesome.
And then after time, your body will produce less of that because it won't be shocked by the fact that you're continuing to progress and add weight. So that's how you do that. So, okay. So we've talked about a lot of concepts. You may need to go back and re-listen to this, and that's cool. But all these concepts are important as you start thinking about developing your program. Now, the core one I would say is that I want you to be thinking about compound exercises. So you can go do a search on the internet. If you want a list of compound movements, you can look for workouts that are on there. But here's what they should have. All the exercises for a beginner should be compound movements. I'll typically have 2 exercises for the legs. Because we've got the quadriceps on the front of our thighs and we've got our glutes. So we've got anterior, which is the front of the thighs, and we've got the back of the thighs is the hamstrings, and then we've got the glutes. Okay, so we want to make sure what we're doing is going to somewhat address both of those. So I'll usually have 2 exercises for the legs to make sure I'm covering off on those. I'll do one for the chest, one for the back, and one for the shoulders.
Perfect.
Now, optionally, when I'm doing strength training, you can mix in some core training. So you can have a set where you're doing a good basic all the way around you core training, but that's somewhat optional because that's not really strength. That's just making sure you're making your body solid so you can even do more strength training later. So an example that I would give is, okay, so I have a healthy person's going to come in. They don't have they're telling me, they're fine to work out. The doctor says they're fine to work out. So everything's cleared that they can do these movements. I'll usually start with a squat, depending on their level. It could be just a body weight squat. It could be a chair squat or bench squat. So if there's some issues with them and their strength or their balance, we just do a chair squat. If they're stronger, we can add dumbbells to it. If they're in really good, decent shape, we might go straight to just doing bar squats. Okay.
Awesome.
But they're going to start with a squat. And then I usually do a split squat. Now, a split squat, you got one leg in front of you, one leg back, and you do the squats, and then you switch legs front and back, and then you do the squats. That's one set. The split squats are the most hated exercise for every beginner I've ever trained. But it works a lot of different muscles in your legs. It's very functional, but I'll usually go with that. Okay. For the chest, I'll do dumbbell bench press. So you're basically laying on your back with the dumbbells by your chest on the side. Your elbows need to be not flared out straight like a 90-degree angle. They need to be closer to the body, like somewhere around 45 or 30. You can find that comfortable spot for yourself. And then you just push those weights away from your body up and down. And then that's one rep. And so dumbbell bench press, dumbbell rows. Now, I usually do these one arm at a time. So bend over like a bench to brace yourself, and then just do rows with one arm with the dumbbell, and then switch to the other side and do rows on that side. And then that's one set. And then for shoulders, I'll just usually do seated dumbbell overhead press. Now, be careful with dumbbell overhead press because the weight has to start up near your shoulders. And so you got to get those weights from they're hanging by your side. You got to get them to your shoulders. And so don't just flop them up there. Okay. Get some hip movement in, or have someone hand you the dumbbells in that up position. So like if I'm working with a beginner, I will have them sit down and I will hand them the dumbbells. So they're not going to risk damaging a rotator cuff like I did, just trying to flip them up there. Yes, most of the things I teach you, I'm teaching from example. And then I might throw in a set of planks, some planks, some twists, and maybe like a bird dog as my complex for a core. And so 3 sets of each of those exercises, that was 5 exercises, and then a set for core, 3 sets for core, and I'm done.
Perfect.
Okay. So that's an example. And then remember, we talked about neuromuscular communication, and that's typically why I program for 10 or 12 with a new person. After you start getting a little bit further advanced and you really want to start kind of pushing the weight up because you got good form, you may drop the reps to 8 or even 6. Okay. So you can use more weight. Gotcha. There's an adaptive response to the body. When you put it under more weight, it gets more comfortable with that weight. So that's basically how I code for a beginner. Now, as you start to become an intermediate, you're going to be able to handle more volume. Unfortunately, if you tried to add more exercises or more sets, you're talking about more time.
Yes.
And your energy level probably won't carry you through a workout that is that long. So what we typically do is say, okay, let's split the workout. We'll do an upper body workout, or we'll do a lower body workout, or something like that. Or we'll do a push pull. Or like I do at my level, I'll do a push, upper body push, an upper body pull, and then legs. Nice. So 3 separate workouts. I've split into 3 separate workouts. And then I add a couple compound movements, and I usually will, I sometimes add an isolation movement or 2. So like for upper body push, I might do bench press, I might do incline press, and then I might do tricep extensions, for example. Cool. Okay. So those, I now have add some isolation movements, and I've added more compound movements, but I do that workout. And then for say back, day or pull day, I'm going to be working my back and my biceps. So this is where I'll do like a lat pull down. I'll do a row, and then maybe I'll do bicep curls.
Nice.
Okay. And so you're adding volume as your body gets better, but those are intermediate things. As a beginner, you want to stick to the compound movements, then start working your weights and working your volume. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, time under tension sucks. Do some of it, but at some point you're like, okay, I want to be starting like doing some real weights, working with the 45s. You might drop your reps down to 8 or 6. And then that will allow you to get like, 3 sets of 6 or 4 sets of 6. You'll work with heavier weight. And that's going to help you build even more strength.
That sounds awesome. Sounds like a good, well-rounded plan.
All right. Any questions, Rachel?
No, I mean, this is exciting. It's funny, Alan, because I think you hit all the things that I do in the gym. And I do still consider myself, I have been in the gym, in my gym in particular, for, years now, decades even. I've spent time in the gym, and it's just nice to hear it reinforced that I'm doing most of what I should be doing in the gym. But again, the purposes for me in the gym is a little different than maybe what you would do in a gym. I'm primarily a runner, so I lift weights just to reduce my risk for injury. And now that I'm menopausal, I lift weights to manage muscle, stave off the sarcopenia and also osteopenia. So, the purpose and what I do in the gym has changed over time. But yeah, it's nice to have all that reinforced.
Well, good. All right. Well, I'll talk to you next week.
Great. Take care, Alan. Have fun at your reunion.
I will. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Jennifer Mann and Carden Rabin and discuss their book, The Secret Language of the Body. Regulate your nervous system, heal your body, free your mind. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.